Energy media readers, we're going to be energy media readers. I'm writing a column and I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Sara Hastings-Simon about it. So welcome to the interview, Sara.
Thanks for having me.
So here's the hypothesis, if you will. The federal government is talking about a bailout program for the oil and gas sector. And supposedly they're split at the moment between those who want to give money to oil and gas and those who would rather invest the money in the clean energy economy. I'm arguing that's the wrong conversation, that the right conversation is to look down the road to 2050. It's net zero emissions economy, roughly. We're moving away from combusting fossil fuels to using them for materials. And the question should be, how do we position the hydrocarbon industry to adapt to that world? That's where we're going. You know, as Walter Gretzky used to say, skate where the puck is going, not where it's been. And I think that's where the puck is going. And so do you agree that's where the puck is going? And do you think that that would be a good use of this $15 billion?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree. And I think essentially all forecasts that I've seen agree now that, you know, long-term demand for oil is in decline, oil, particularly for combustion. Getting into then the question of, you know, how do you spend recovery money? I think there's a couple of important distinctions to make. So one is the distinction around the timeline. And are you talking about, you know, money to sort of just address the immediate crisis versus money that's, you know, reinvestment and recovery money? And then also, as you were saying, kind of there's a distinction as well between, you know, how you give money to a given industry. Is it with strings attached? Is it more directed at the workers? Is it more directed at the companies and investors? So there's a lot of kind of, you know, like always, the devil's in the details, and how you do that matters. So what I think would be the best approach is, you know, to keeping that in mind, indeed, keeping that long-term future in mind, and then reinvesting money in a way that's compatible with that. And that's thinking about, you know, what are transition paths for the workers, what are transition paths for the industry. And all of that is, you know, does take a little bit of time and kind of sober thought. But we also need to be careful that we're not, you know, we have a limited amount of money to spend, and so it needs to go into the right places.
One of the most difficult parts of the conversation that we're going to have as a country, and particularly within Alberta, is you can't save everybody. There's just, the industry is too big. There's too many companies that were already in trouble. So for instance, the junior oil and gas producers, those that make under 10,000 barrels a day, are in deep, deep trouble. Many of them are already going bankrupt, and others are hanging on by their fingertips. The companies that service them, the small service companies, and these are scattered across rural Alberta, which would be, you know, very, very difficult for those rural economies, those, you know, 5,000 to 10,000 people communities all over the place. But nevertheless, we can't support everyone, and maybe some of them we're just going to have to say they're going to have to fail.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult conversation for sure. And I think we've seen, you know, in the US with the coal industry that I always, you know, like to point to, because I think it's going through something that's similar to what oil and gas, you know, is going to be facing a little bit accelerated timeline, is that, yeah, indeed. I mean, if you have overall demand starting to decline, you're going to have a contraction of the market. And then what I think is, you know, some of the missteps that I think we've seen happen with the coal industry in the US is where, you know, funds or attempts to support that industry have really ended up going to investors and not to the workers, right? And we've seen there a couple of big companies that ended up, you know, kind of overnight, basically walking away from a lot of environmental liabilities as well as a lot of worker liabilities, and leaving, you know, the public with that the purse. And so I think that's also really important as we think about, you know, where and who we support. You know, fundamentally, the government has a responsibility to the people of Alberta, and we need to make sure that that's, you know, where the support is directed.
My final question for you, or a point that I'd like to discuss, and that is, there's also the aspect that we need to seize opportunities. So I know you've done a lot of work on the old AOSTRA, the government-funded research organization. And we know that the Alberta Innovates is spending a lot of money developing bitumen beyond combustion. They're turning bitumen into carbon fiber, which has 1.5 to 2.5 times the value per barrel than it does if you turn it into fuel. And it seems like this is an opportunity to maybe accelerate those industries of the future, which actually could provide as much or more employment and as much or more value in the same way that we did 30, 40 years ago under the Lougheed government.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think, another more recent example that I would point to is, what the US did coming out of the 2008-2009 recession period with the Reinvestment and Recovery Act, where they did indeed, put quite a bit of money in the form of things like loan guarantees, but also grants into industries that, I think now have really been accelerated. So that was, the wind and solar industry, but also EVs, right? So Tesla, in fact, was able to build its manufacturing facility in California because of a combination of basically, well, there was coming out of the recession, there was the opportunity to purchase this facility at a lower cost, but then also importantly, they were given, loan guarantee, given financing basically by the U.S. government. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a huge opportunity. I mean, obviously it's coming with a lot of costs, and I don't want to minimize that. But given that that's where we find ourselves now, I think we would be wise as Albertans and Canadians to look at how we can, make the best use of recovery investments and really use the time to be redirecting, the direction of growth of the Albertan economy going forwards.
Yeah, a final point, your use of the TARP example, I think, is a really good one, because the U.S. government, when it gave money to GM and Chrysler, specifically said you have to put some of that money, you have to focus on electric vehicles. And so not so much with Chrysler, but with GM, they really embraced that turn to electric. And we saw 2-3 weeks ago them unveil their big new lineup of electric vehicles with the Ultium platform and battery. I mean, really cutting edge stuff that going into the 2020s will position them to be a global leader in electric vehicles, long range, lower price. And it seems like if we're going to do that, that's actually a model that might be good to follow.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, green, I've heard it's called green strings model, but the idea that, if the government is stepping up and essentially acting as an investor in these companies, like any investor, it has the right to, dictate terms that come along with its investment, and in particular terms that it, sees as being most beneficial. So indeed, thinking about, the ways that money can help to, grow new areas, ensure that companies are thinking of that longer term future, which is very much a role for, government when they are getting involved in industry, I think is very consistent with both, the role that government should be playing and really what's needed.
Terrific. Sara, thank you very much. Appreciate your insights as always, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again in the near future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.